Kumla and Ablat Gemara. Today's daf is daf Nun Ches. So the last thing we learned was an incident where a guy wanted to buy some wine in a Jewish store, and the Jewish vendor refused to sell him. He said he denied that there was any wine. He saw there a jug. He put his finger inside. He said, "Tell me, is this wine or not?" And the Yid got so upset, he took a jug of wine and he filled it in his barrel. And the question is now, what happens to the contents of that barrel? The goy stirred the wine, but even though he had no intention. So this is a case of was deliberate, but no intention of pouring or drinking the wine, just touching the wine. So Rava permitted it. Rav Huna Bar China, Rav Huna the son of Nachman both objected to that. When they came to his town, he refused to see them, but eventually they made their way in. And he denied, because actually we're going to see in a minute why he denied. He denied that he ever said that it was totally mutter and everything else. What he meant was that you can sell the rest of the wine and just subtract the amount of wine from that jug that the guy touched. But actually, he intended to say it was totally mutter. But then he changed his mind. As we'll see in a minute why he changed his mind. So this is how Rashi learns the Gemara. So the Gemara tells us a story that happened prior to this arrival of Huna to his house, and why Rabbi changed his mind, because Abaya bombarded him with the numerous questions, and eventually he relented and he acceded to Abaya. So the Gemara says here we are in Daf Nun Ches Amud Aleph, Omar Rabba, about 7 lines from the top of the page. Omar Rabba, Rabba said. When I arrived at Pumbedisa and he heard about this incident, Akfen Nachmeni, my colleague Nachmeni, who's Abaya's real name was Nachmeni, and Rabba didn't want to call him Nachmeni because Rabba's father was Rabba Bar Nachmeni. So therefore, Rabba called him Abaya. Others say Abaya is an abbreviation, Ashirucha B'chal Yosem. Anyway, Abaya was raised in Rabba's house. He was his nephew, or a relative or a friend, and he was raised in his house. So the Rabbi said, when I came to Pumbedisa, Nachmeni bombarded me, Shmaita, with all kinds of stories of Masnita and different brises to prove me wrong. The Aser. Shmaita, what's the story? There was an incident that occurred in a Doi. A very similar incident. And V'Asa Shmu. Now this story happened before the other story. So Rabbi already changed his mind. But he didn't want to reveal that to Rav Huna Bar China, and Rav Nachman gave him a hard time in many areas I disputed with him. He didn't want them to feel, emboldened that they continue arguing with him all the time. So therefore, he tried to tell them that you misunderstood me, and I didn't mean that. But in fact, he changed his mind and he ruled that it's completely usher because the guy did it deliberately. It's usher behind. It's usher even to have any benefit. Says the Gemara. I told the buyer, you know why? They were just being machmir. They were scared if we say that in this case it's the wine permitted, they'll think next time the guy actually did stir the wine and the wine also be permitted. Because they're not knowledgeable people who didn't want to tell them. So Abaye right away responded. He said to me, Tveria and the two cities there, bastions of learning, you're telling me, the average populace had no idea of how to learn. But the mechuzah, you're seeing mechuzah, which are notorious for being materialistic and other things, and b'nei Torah, you'll call them b'nei Torah. You rule for them that it's mutter. How come? Number one. Number two, masnita, we have a braisa. The braisa says, agardamim. Agardamim is these officers of the court, or officers of the government, or the tax agency, that they would go around and checking that the wine was pure and that they didn't dilute the wine to such an extent that they're basically cheating people. So like the fair trade practices to make sure that everybody's behaving correctly. So this Agardamin, he came to the Jewish store selling wine, and he wanted to make sure that the wine that he was selling, all the barrels were sealed. So what he did was he bore a hole in the lid. He bore a hole in the lid, and then he had a straw. And with that straw, he sucked out some wine. Or he took a cup, put it into the barrel, and took out some wine, and he wanted to test it to see. And then after he drank a little bit of the wine, he tasted it was all right, he poured the rest of the contents of that cup back into the barrel. A big problem. Here was direct. Here he wanted to test the wine, but he wasn't doing it for libations. It was deliberate. How do we treat that? This is a story. The Asrua. And they said, doesn't matter why. He touched it, deliberate, it is forbidden. My love, bahano. So right away, Sabai said, probably they banned it completely. You can't even benefit. So I answered back, why no b'shtiya? Why say benefit? Maybe it's only not a drink. Like my case, I also think that when a guy, stirred over there, it would, drink it anymore. But you're allowed to have a no. Over here also you're allowed to have a no. So Bai says here it won't work. You know why? Because if you read the Brisa, continue reading the Brisa, you'll see the Brisa uses another word if the Brisa feels that it's mutabano. If so, listen and let it say yimacher. Then the wording should have been, if this occurred, not instead of saying that it's usher, it should say sell it. In other words, you cannot drink it, but you still have hana. And how do I know that this is the format of the Brisa? Because the very next case in the Brisa says cherem. Cherem is somebody who is a fool, is not really aware of what he's doing, very wild. That Rashi says cherem is a meshuggah. A guy, he extended his hand and touched the barrel. He thought that it was oil. So this person generally doesn't know what he's doing, and he mistakenly thought that the product in here was oil. But in Sasha, I thought it was wine. Turned to be wine. The question is, so what happens now? He was a guy. This occurred. They said yimacher. That was since he deliberately put his finger in there. You're not allowed to drink the wine, but you sell it. So we see when the Brisa believes that it's mutar b'hano, it uses the recommendation sell it. So in the first part, also should said sell it. It seems clear to me that if this inspector came in to test the wine, then the wine is not only us in drinking, it's also us in having any benefit whatsoever. So it's a kasha and Rabba to yufta the Rabba. So Rabba has been repudiated. So Rav of yesterday has been totally repudiated, but he refused to relent and tell them. Tosfos has a very hard time with Rashi's pshat, and I think we even mentioned it yesterday. Rav from all is outstanding or stands out from all Amoraim and Shas. That Rav, if he ever paskins something, and the next day he would come and says, "Hadabei Rav," he says, "What I told you yesterday, I was wrong," and he had no problem confessing to his talmidim. He wasn't embarrassed. Yesterday I thought the halach was X, and today I think the halach is Y. So if this is what happened, Rav Huna bar China and Rav Huna bar Nachman disagreed with him, and Rabbi found out from Abaye that he made a mistake, then why would he hide and close the door, and why would he then lie to them or try to deceive them and say, "I never meant that it was totally asur." I never meant it was totally mutter. I meant the rest of the wine is mutter minus the wine that he put in the little jug. Why would he do that? Why didn't he just say, "I made a mistake"? That's the kasha that Tosfos asks. And Rashi, if he doesn't hold on the pshat, maybe to defend Rashi, Rav Huna bar China and Rav Huna bar Nachman continuously argued with Rabbi, and they had the shofars. So when each one put out their people out there which means it wasn't a pleasant argument. It looked like they had a standoff because Rabbi sent out his people, the shofars, to go and announce to everybody. I just was matted. They right away sent out people with shofars to say, "No, it's us." That wasn't a normal. It wasn't like Rabbi with his talmidim. It wasn't Rabbi with a colleague that had the spin halacha. It was much more than that, and therefore Rabbi didn't want to embolden them that they should continue this kind of machlekes. Maybe that's how we learn Pshat and Rashi. Anyway, let's continue. Gemara, the new sense of on the bottom of the page. The Gemara tells an interesting story here. Rabbi Yechon ben Arza, Rabbi Yesi ben Horai, both of them have a yasi that was sitting because Shasacham drinking wine. Also, who got a person came along and they automatically, for whatever reason, assumed he was a yid. Maybe he was wearing a hat or something they couldn't tell. They said to him, "Do us a favor, Ta Ashkinan, can you please fill up our cups with wine?" Lebasa the Rama Lekasa, after he filled the cups of wine, Igloy Milsa, it was revealed to them that he was Gar a guy. What do you do now? Is Chad, one of them said, "Aser, it is forbidden. I feel about no." Well, the guy poured the wine, deliberately poured the wine, so this is a bekavana. That's a normal case of stam yenim, which is also achilas bana. And the chad shari afil b'shtia, and the other one was the other extreme. Not only in this case because this person, as we'll soon see, had no idea, we'll soon see, did not intend for libation, intend to give it to us. Therefore, it's mutter completely. What's going on here? Amar Shmuel Levi said, I can explain both opinions here. And Pisvara, even though they're arguing, but you can see where each one's coming from. Let's start with the first one. Man the Asa, the one who asked Shapir Asa, makes sense. Not only not allowed to drink the wine, it's even forbidden to have enough. Why? Well, man the Shadi Shapir Shadi, and the one who permitted also did it reasonably. Let's go through it. Man, the one who asks, Meimer Amar, he says, Salke daite der Rabbanon kihani shikr kashasi. What do I think? That these rabbis are drinking beer? Wine is a chashuv drink. Beer is for pedestrians. So definitely it's wine. So the guy knew it was wine. He deliberately poured them. So that's tam yainem. That's also bachil. Surely the guy knew that this was wine. Then nasche, and he poured it. It's not even a question of putting your finger in. But you put your finger in, where the kavanah. Here he mamish poured. That's tam yainem, and therefore it's asa. So that's the opinion that says asa. But however, man the shadi, but the one who permitted it, shapir shadi. Why? This is what he thought. Meimer Amar, this guy thinks. These rabbis, all the goyim who lived in Jewish cities knew that they cannot touch the wine. They always knew they didn't have the wine in a bag. They would never give the waiter the guy to drink the wine. And he's wondering, why would these rabbis, who are scholars, ask me to pour the wine? Must be, they think they're drinking wine. It must be, it wasn't wine. It was something else. The detash, tell me to drink. It must be beer. Otherwise, they wouldn't have asked me. And what do you call it? And therefore, he didn't pour the wine. When he took it, he thought it was beer. So this is like loy b'kavana. Loy b'kavana. And this loy b'kavana, l'chayda loy b'kavana should be asur b'hana. But here it's if you mutter b'hana, here we're saying you mutter drinking as well. Yeah. Now, remember, he didn't touch the wine here. He just poured the wine. So here we have a case of like koichay without kavana, and therefore you're allowed to even drink. Says the Gemara, how can he think that it's beer? Well, kochazi, he can see as soon as he starts pouring, he sees it's wine, and he continued pouring. He knew it was wine. Balai was dark; he couldn't see. Well, wine has a smell, a fragrant smell. The charate was new wine; it didn't really ferment. Well, Kanogabe, this is more than just pouring. He touched the wine, and because he touched the wine, isn't that even loy b'kavana? You cannot drink it. So he says it, but not. He had a big spoon, a keli, a ladle, a cup. He had some kind of a davar acher. He was holding in his hand, and he was taking it. So here we have a case of loy b'kavana. He thought it was beer, but davar acher. This is maga. No, but we said before that's asur. Now this is the raya to Rashi, because you remember we spoke about yesterday that Rashi makes no difference whether you touch the wine directly or you touch it through a davar acher. The dinim are exactly the same. Here the Gemara says he had a ladle or a cup, and a till is a dime, the till is a keli. So you had a cup. So he didn't touch the wine directly. He had a intermediary, a cup, and loy b'kavana. The Gemara says you're not allowed to drink it. You're not allowed to drink it. Tosfos actually has to change the gears in the Gemara here to fit his shitta that says if it's through davar. I remember yesterday in Paskins, if you use a davar acher and loy b'kavana, if the guy had no intention and it was using through an intermediary, it's not asur. I think Gemara clearly says it is. So the Tosfos has a different version in the Gemara. What says like we're talking about the kamoidik ayruke. We're talking about he was pouring it. He's pouring it. He didn't touch the wine itself. He took the whole. This is the Yiddish wine. So what happened was the Gemara saying that was he picked up the whole barrel. The Gemara thought he put his hand into the. Yeah. And then they saw this. I don't know if it's a waiter or not. They saw this guy there. Do us a favor, give us some wine. Yeah. Of course. So we assumed that the story is that the guy took a cup and took it. So nobody touched it, whatever it is. According to Tosfos, he touched directly. According to Rashi, he had this cup. The Tosfos changes the gears. But the Gemara is saying here that he didn't touch the wine. He picked up the barrel, or maybe it's a jug, and he poured it. So therefore, it's koichli. It's not touching directly, it's only koichli. And loy b'kavana. So the Gemara, like zicha the kamoidik ayruke, v'hav l'koichli shaloi b'kavana. The kol koichli shaloi b'kavana. If a guy pours it and he knows it's wine, then of course it's asur. But drinking wine as well. But if it's what do you call it? Pouring, and he thought it was not wine. He thought it was beer, as we explained before. Then it's a double. It's koicha. In the Rashi's case, it wasn't koicha. You actually had a davar achar. You had a cup in your hand, so that's a davar achar. You had a lulav that touched the wine, so that's not koicha. That's direct through your hand, but your hand extended through this middle piece. Here we're saying that this is purely koicha. You're not putting anything in the wine, you're not touching the wine, even through a middle thing. You picked up the whole jug and you poured it like we have normally have. A guy comes and pours wine. So a guy comes and pours wine, lamba bushel, it's a problem. But if it's leiva kavana, he thought it was Coke, and he poured it, then you're allowed to drink it. Wait, the question. What happens? Okay, you introduced the idea of koichay. What happens if a guy pours water into the wine to dilute it? So he doesn't touch the wine directly. He pours the water, but the water now makes the wine move around. So this is koichay. Right? This is indirect koichay. So what happens if a guy uses koichay diluting wine? What's the status of this wine? Says the Gemara, Amalei. First of all, before we get to the question, he said to him, why do you use a strange word, Masach? When we talk in the Gemara diluting, we always use the word mazag. Mazag, that you should dilute the wine. Why are you using the word Masach? The Gemara, I know. I'm saying I'm using a term from the Tanakh. He says in Tanakh, when Malach says that Tavcha Tivcha, she will go and shech, and then Masecha, make your home meal, and Masecha Yena, and she will dilute your wine. Chama said to him 1 second. Lashon Torah la'ashron kamlasin. We're talking here in Gemara halachas. Let's talk Lashon Chachamim. We don't necessarily use words of the Torah. The Torah Tanakh. Tanakh. Use the word mascha. We use the word masach. So let's get the wording right. Why we have this whole digression, I don't know. Anyway, Amalei. So he said, no. Bottom line, Mike. What's the halacha? You're getting very pedantic here. What's the halacha? Amalei. Usher is a bit. That even though he didn't touch it, it was only koichoy, the water that came in. Nevertheless, you're not allowed to drink it. Why? Gzeda de rabban. And what's the gzeda? B'shum, we say to a nazir, leich amri nazir. We tell a nazir, go. Schoyer, go around and around. The camera, don't get too close to the vines, because you might eat grapes, and a nazir not eat grapes. In other words, we always try, like Muktzah and Shabbos, we always try to add some distance. So therefore, hana is definitely permitted because it's koichoy. But you're not allowed to drink it. So we said before, if you touch through davar achar shalei bekavanas, if you touch through davar achar shalei bekavana, you're not allowed to drink it, but you'll have enough. So the same thing over here. The gzeda only makes it you're not allowed to drink it if the guy diluted it, but you could have enough. Rabbi Yirmiyah equal the Safta came to a place called Safta Chazi. So Chamra wine the Mazgid, we thought that a guy diluted it. We each the Yisrael and even drank from it, but also he said to drinking not allowed to. Same thing. Shem leich amin azida. We tell them to go. The kamla six. Even I'm Rabbi Yechel. I'm Rabbi Yechel. Yeah, you should go. We call wine that a guy diluted also wine. Shem leich amin azida. The kamla six. They all agree. They shlakish equal to Betzer. He came to a city called Betzer, and one of the Aram Miklat is called Betzer. So he assumed that Betzer is part of Yisrael. Betzer. So Chazal Yisrael, you saw he's two things. You saw Yid Ka'achal Peided Lamas. You saw Yid that did not eat fruit of your Meiser. But Asalu, he said, what are you doing? How can you eat it? And at Yisrael, you have to give Meiser. Number one. Chazal Maya, I will go further. It's clear from this Gemara here that only in Yisrael, you chayiv a Meiser, not Chutzlars. And Rabbi Time has a whole problem with that. He brings all these rayas in, long traces, that a Chutzlars also chayiv Meiser with Rabban. So Taisus, one part of Taisus wants to say is that we're Maisa, Dogon, and Tito Yitzhak, there with Mahat Torah, like grains and wine and oil, you have to give Maisa, and with the Rabban, you have to give Chutlaris. But if it's only Maisa Rabban, like Maisa Yera, giving for vegetables, then the Chutlaris is the butter. Taisus brings rayas that even in Dogon you chayv Chutlaris. So Taisus, Rabbi Tam concludes that we're talking here about it was the Mai. The Mai is you bought it from an Amorit, so most do give Mises, some don't, so we're strict and we say let's treat it as if it was a Mises. But Chutzlars, we're not going to be that strict. Okay. Then Chazam Mai, you saw water, the Sag level Chav, you saw water that a guy was diluting into the wine, and Vishasi Yisrael, and he drank it, but Asaluhu. And he said, how can you drink this wine? A guy poured the water. Also the caveat, then he went to his brother-in-law Rabbi Yechon, and he told him what happened. You want to know Amalei Adibek Turichalach, while your code is on you, go back and tell them you're passing wrong. Zil Hadar Betzer Lav Haini Betzer. Betzer is not a remikla. Betzer, that one of the Aramiklas called Betzer, is in Etzisrael, but you're in Betzerah with a hey, that's outside of Etzisrael. So there's no problem with my or the mine. And what about the water? Since the water they used was public water, spring water, Umayim Sharabim ain't a sudden. We learned before already. Mayim Sharabim cannot become usher. Ain Adam Isa Dover She'enu Shalai. You cannot ask someone who doesn't belong to you. Rabbi Yechon Tameid Amar Rabbi Yechon Shimei Tzaddik. Rabbi Yechon near Shimei Tzaddik. It takes as a whole debate over here where Rabbi Shimei Tzaddik sounds like he was his Rebbe. We have other Gemaras in Sanhedrin which sound like he wasn't. Over there, Taisa not here, but Taisa this, and then says there were two Rabbi Shimei Tzaddiks. Mayin Sherabim Ein Asari. Public water can never become usher. It's not yours. Hadi Yochid Nesari. But an individual does become usher. Now, so the question is, how can you ever have individual water when Yeshua made a rule that anytime the spring water has to be available to the public? So, a few answers. Taisa here gives two answers. That only time that it's public water is if it's spring water that's natural. But if you dug a hole, a bore, and you brought out water, that water does belong to you. Or we're talking about an area where the entire city belongs to you. Taisa previously answered is talking about where the spring water ended up in your own. If the spring water is inside your own property, then it's not public water. So anyhow, public water you cannot ask it. So why did you ask the guy touch the water? It's not a guy can't ask the water. It's not his task to prohibit. Then Gemara says, the water is attached, and we have a rule that anything attached does not become Avodah Zarah. Like the Talishna Gola. What happened was a wave. Interesting, a spring should have a wave, but it's a wave or something of this water went flying up. It was detached from the rest of the water, and it's like the case of the stone that detached itself from the mountain. So the Gemara says, no. And what's the case of the stone that detached? We had a machlekes there. And the machlekes was, why is it something, a mountain is not Avodah Zarah? Is it because it's attached? So then when the stone broke off on its own, it's no longer attached. It should be Avodah Zarah if you worshipped it. Or is it because there was no human intervention? And then even though it detached on its own, it's also no human intervention. So it does not become Avodah Zarah. So the same argument be here by the wave that they separate. And what's the problem with that? Rabbi Yochanan is the one who said, so here, Save, Rabbi Yechon said that it's permitted, as long as even though it's detached, this wave is permitted. Save, Avnei Harshin Dalninu. This is the case of a stone that broke on its own. Tistayim the Rabbi Yechon the Amar Asuris. So let's say from here, Rabbi Yechon is the one who said that it's awesome. Why before we didn't know who said what? The children of Rabbi Yechon. So the Rabbi Yechon is comes along as Asur. Rabbi Yechon is saying that water of a yachid is asur, and we said the only way that possibly that it's asur is that if it becomes a wave and it's separated. So Rabbi Yechon holds that if it's separated, no human intervention, it is that it's no longer attached. It is now asur because it's no longer mechuber. So before we didn't know who said what. It's clear. Rabbi Yechon said, "You know why don't I?" Like tzrich is talking about it. Tefichnu biyadei. The wave didn't detach by itself. You actually detached the wave. So therefore, and then you bow down to it afterwards. And everyone agrees in that case, if it was physically done, it's no longer mechuber. Plus, there is human intervention, and then you bow down to it. It definitely becomes avodah zarah. Okay, we'll stop.